Thank you everyone for joining. I'm so glad that so many of you actually made their way here physically, despite the rain outside, and despite this being reading for students in South HKU. I'm very glad to welcome Monika, Professor Monika OBERLE, and Ms. Valeriia HULKOVYCH from the University of Göttingen in Germany. They are here on a project or exchange project that is funded by the Germany-Hong Kong Joint Research Team, funded by the Research Grants Council of the Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, as well as the German Academic Exchange Service. And we're doing a project on game-based learning in the area of civic education. I think my colleagues will also talk a bit about what they've done in the context of this project, but most of what they are going to talk about will be results from studies in Germany and Europe. Before we start, however, I'd like to introduce the two speakers. Monika OBERLE has been a professor of political science and civic education at the University of Göttingen for 9 years, since 2014. And previously she has a bachelor's degree in political science from the Philipps University of Marburg in Germany. She has a master's degree from Free University in Berlin, in Germany, and her PhD from Karlsruhe University of Education, also in Germany. She is among the very few scholars in Germany who do very rigorous quantitative empirical research throughout their in the field of civic education. And her areas of expertise are democracy education, civic education about the European Union, digital game-based learning in the field of civic education, as well as teacher professionalization in civics, and extracurricular and in-school civic education. She is the chairwoman of the Scientific Council of the Federal Agency of Civic Education in Germany, and previously she also was the chairwoman of the Society for Didactics of Politics and Youth, Civic and Adult Education in Germany, as well as previously she has been on the executive board of the Society for Empirical Education Research in Germany. Ms. Valeriia HULKOVYCH is a research assistant at the University of Göttingen, working with Professor OBERLE. She has a master's degree in political science from the University of Göttingen and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wrocław in Poland, also in political science. She's also been an exchange student at Humboldt University of Berlin in Germany. And her research interests are in extracurricular civic education, EU and UN civic education, separatist movements in the European Union, and serious games in civic education. She's Ukrainian and speaks 4 languages fluently, at least 4 languages fluently. And now, without further ado, let's welcome our speakers, and the floor is yours.
Dear Frank, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. We are honored to be here. We've experienced some of Hong Kong during the last days. It's our first day here, but not the last. We will come back next year in this project. We brought you an overview over our work, and we are also looking forward to your questions and comments. We have time for that as well. And we don't want to bore you with civic education in Germany, but still we would like to give you in the beginning a quick introduction what civic education in Germany looks like, but this really only takes 5 minutes, don't worry, because I know some of you are not political science students, most of you are not, but this is the context that we work in. We have a chair for civic education in Germany. So perhaps you already know that historically in Western Germany, in the Federal Republic of Germany, civic education is rooted in the scheme of re-education after our Nazi regime and the failures during the Weimar Republic. So the overarching aim is to strengthen a democratic political culture in Germany in order to stabilize a functioning democracy after the war, Second World War, but also after reunification. The theory is that the political culture and the political structure, there's the need for some congruence in order for the system to function. So now, we jump to now in Germany, we have 4 pillars of civic education. One is we have a school subject. I think you also have liberal arts or something, and we have a school subject in all types of schools. We also have a cross-curricular principle of civic education in all subjects, which means there's a certain classroom climate open for discussion. And the whole school has a certain idea of democracy education, with students participating in decision-making and service learning projects. Also, fourthly, very important is extracurricular, out-of-school civic education, with many agents working there. And our research focuses on school and the subject of civics, but also on extracurricular civic education. The principles, I think they are not new to you, because you know that problem-based learning, a principle of exemplarity in order to deliver concepts and conceptual learning. It's learner-centered, it should be, this is what it should be. It's not that really in school it must always looks like that, okay? But learner-centered, action-oriented, conflict-oriented, because conflict is, in the German idea, part of politics, and diversity orientation with a diverse classroom. And very important is the famous consensus of Beutelsbach, which almost is 50 years old, and says that there's a prohibition of the teacher to indoctrinate and to overwhelm the students. There's the principle of controversy. Everything that is controversial in science and society should be controversial in class. And there's empowerment ideas, student orientation, enabling students to politically engage in line with their own interests. And now we come to the aims, and that already leads directly to our empirical research. This is just the background for you to understand why we look at certain outcomes of education. The overarching aim of civic education and all education in school in Germany is Mündigkeit. Perhaps the philosopher will have heard of that. So that's the idea of emancipation, that people can make up their own mind and make their own decisions. But related to that, not in contradiction, is something that is easier to measure empirically, because you cannot measure emancipation or Mündigkeit. That is competencies. I know you have the concept as well in Hong Kong. So the political competencies with cognitive, attitudinal, motivational, and volitional dispositions. That's the pedagogical psychologist Weiner, perhaps also known to you. Yeah, he was also important in the OECD context. And for political competency, I show you the model. One of the models is that students should gain the ability to politically judge, to politically act, but also knowledge about politics and motivations and attitudes. And for motivations, especially important is internal efficacy, interest in politics, like interest in mathematics, but also self-efficacy, that is the belief that I have the knowledge to do mathematics, or I have the knowledge to engage in politics. And that's the last slide of our introduction before we start with the empirical studies, because we look in our empirical studies, especially at political efficacy, political knowledge and political efficacy. This is the perception of one's own potential to influence politics if you start to act. And that means that you need internal efficacy, that is self-efficacy, the belief that you are able to do it, like in mathematics, that you are able to do mathematics, but also external efficacy. This is the feeling of responsiveness, that the system will respond to what you want. I know this is political science, and it's not important for those who are not studying political science, but it's the background. And now we have just one slide regarding the serious games, because this is quite new in Germany, to have serious games as a tool of civic education. So what do we want? We think out of other studies, and some of you are experts in this, that in other fields, serious games can promote motivation, engagement, and also knowledge because you have this immersive experiences, fun and immersive experiences. And you can reach also students that normally are not so easily interested, and perhaps also not cognitively so active. Then you have more sustainable effects and learning outcomes as compared to purely text-based learning. But however, we see for civic education internationally a profound lack of research on the implementation and effects of civic education, of serious games. So what do? And for the 3 studies that we want to present you, I show you how we address our empirical research. Can you also see? Yes, our empirical research. We want to evaluate the suitability of serious games and simulation games in civic education for a certain target group, including the assessment of effects and the subjective evaluation of the experience by the students. I mean, that's what sometimes, it's not new, but that's our way. We look at both the effects, the objective effects, and the subjective evaluation of the effects and the game, taking into account various initial dispositions like socio-demographic background variables, or pre-interest or pre-knowledge, or digital gaming affinity. But we also want to evidence-based develop these serious games because we collaborate closely with the developer of the games and with educational practitioners. So the idea is some kind of design-based research where we give back the experiences that we see in our systematic evaluation, and the game developers and practitioners change their implementation accordingly, and we re-evaluate and see whether this works better. We do it with a mixed method design in all of our studies that looks at, on the one hand, with semi-standardized questionnaires, but also with interviews with participants after the game and with participatory observations. We have 2 to 3 measurement points, and in the better studies, but it's not always possible, we also have control groups that don't have this intervention, so that's then really an intervention study. The other is, of course, not just quasi-intervention study. So we brought you 3 studies, and we can also make a break in between for your questions, perhaps after the first or second study. The one thing is simulation games as a didactic tool of civic education. I don't know whether you're familiar with simulation games in civic education. You simulate a decision-making process of politics. For example, in the parliament, how a decision on environmental politics is derived at. So you look at how committees work and so on. But you don't just look at it, but you play it. So you take on the role of a certain parliamentarian of a certain fraction, and then you have to act. And we see, or one thinks, and now we have also some empirical evidence, that simulation games make pluralism of interest as well as political negotiation and decision-making processes more palpable in a game-based fashion, like all serious games. But there's still a lack of systematic research. Internationally, I have contacts to the US, to Belgium, and we go to conferences together. But it only starts to develop this network that systematically looks at the effects. Also on the university level, some of you might have studied in the United States, and perhaps you know the model United Nations. So there you experience how the United Nations makes decisions. Right now, they are also working hard, and you play a certain country. Perhaps you play China. And then you realize how they make certain decisions. And there's more rigorous studies now. And this study was a short, in-class, secondary school simulation game of the European Parliament. It is now an analog face-to-face study, but we also studied online simulation games. But I first wanted to show you this, and then we go to 2 digital serious games. For 3 hours, you play a decision of the European Parliament in the European Union regarding different topics. It was data security, it was environmental protection, and it was how you use animals for food production. And they had to, with different interests and nationalities, they had to bring about a decision. And we collected data with, in the end, 308 secondary school students at the average age of 17 years. Now, what did we look there? We took with our, I'll show you the results of the standardized part of the questionnaire. We have a questionnaire with multiple items, mostly Likert scale, or for the knowledge, it is multiple choice or single choice items with rush scaling. And here you see how many items we have in each of the measurement models. It is not so many because it is always the compromise between the efficiency of data collection and the validity and reliability of measurement. But we have quite good Cronbus alpha, as you see, quite a good reliability. And here, this is calculated in M+. We also have good fit values for these measurement constructs. And I have example items for you in the backup if you are interested in example items. But now 4 slides for the effects of this study. Here you see the median values of the rating of the students of the game after having played it. So we see that the 308 students find it interesting and informative and not too difficult. Why is this so interesting? We have played the same game with university teachers, grammar school civics teachers of one of our best regional countries, Baden-Württemberg. And they said, oh, that's nice. It's too difficult for my students. And perhaps you have experienced that as well. Teachers think everything is too difficult for their students with these games. I think it is because we, as experts, we have so many thoughts about this in our head, and we think that's too difficult. But the students don't know so much yet, but they still can play it and they can get something out of it. And they did not find it too difficult, not boring. And this is the average. So all of the students, no matter how interested they were in politics. Now we see, for an example, pre-post values. This is mean values on a Likert scale. 1, I don't agree at all. 4, I fully agree. And here you see Cohen's D values, which show you the effect size of the change. And remember, it was just 3 hours. So we don't expect high effects, but we see noticeable effects for many of the constructs. This is attitudes like the relevance for everyday life. Is the EU, which is so far away, relevant for my life? We see the willingness to participate. Here, we don't see it for the whole sample, actually. That's not so easy to change, the willingness to participate, but we see the efficacy and the objective knowledge has changed. We also see that the assessment of the game, this is also multiple items, measurement models. We see that there's overall a good assessment of the game. It's positive. They say, yes, I've learned something. And they say, well, has it motivated me to further engage? That is lower. And we see that for all the games that we look at. And we also look at who is motivated more. So because, this is, again, in a descriptive way first. Example items, when they say, what did they take out of the game? And we see the percentage of those who strongly agree and those who somewhat agree, extremely high percentages of saying, it became clearer to me how difficult it is to find a collective solution in politics. Or I understand better how the legislation process works, or how political decisions are made, and I understand the EU better. The relevance for the daily life is a bit lower, but still it is about 70% who say, now I understand better what the EU has to do with my everyday life. And because we heard that you are many of you are expert empirical researchers in education, we also wanted to bring you one more deeper digging results of. We did many different things, but one thing is we did latent structural equation models of how the students rated the game and the effects. So remember, we have the general content map with about 11 items. We have the subjectively perceived learning effect, and we have the perceived motivation to further engage with the EU and politics. And we see that I'll show you in a second the demographic background variables, but what is really important is the pre-interest in politics. You can imagine that for mathematics. Those who are interested in mathematics, and you do a game with them, afterwards perhaps those who like mathematics, interested, they say, oh, that was cool. And the others say, oh, mathematics again. So we see that there's a positive effect of pre-interest in politics on the general contentment and the perceived motivation especially, but not on the subjective learning. All students equally said, the interested, not interested, I've gained something. The pre-knowledge is not important here, no direct effect. That's just the background variables where we saw that females, and we see that in all of our simulation game studies, that they have less political interest in Germany, but they rate the learning effect higher than the boys. But we can't go deeper into this now. But the deeper digging now is the latent class analysis. I think that's easy for you all to understand without political science. We did a latent class analysis of the pre-political interest because we wanted to know the people who are not interested in politics. Do they just rate the game less good than the ones interested, or do they have an absolute value that they didn't like the game and that they didn't learn so? And for this, we did a latent class analysis with 3 groups. You see those with low political interest are really few, and that is for grammar schools now. And it's really a prejudice in Germany that they say young people are all not interested in politics. It's not true. Of course, some people with less education, there's different values. But the medium interest, that's the highest group, medium interest, and a high interest in politics before, still 116. And what we see now is, this is the groups, yeah? And now you see that the simulation assessment for the group with a low interest, those who had before said, I'm not interested. I would never take my free time to do anything with politics. Please go away with politics. Political knowledge is not important. We're really on a Likert scale 1, not interested. Here you see that even these said, it was interesting. I liked the game. I would do it again. It's a 3 on a 4-point Likert scale, so I rather agree. They said, I learned something. But where they differ is, sorry, I would still not take my free time to engage with politics or to learn more about the EU. Yeah, I have other things to do. So that's the game didn't do. But this is very, very positive, I'd say, because these people, you can imagine for mathematics, they don't like mathematics, they're not interested, and they say afterwards, oh, I've learned something. That's it for this study. I don't show you this study, I just want to show you that we did it. You know, voting advice applications, perhaps, voting advice applications, they are all over the world now, and there you can, before voting, you can test out the position of parties and see how you align with them. And it's gameful, but so far not really researched in class. And here we did the first pilot study, how this works in class. But I can tell you more about it later if you're interested. Now I hand over to Valeriia, who looks at a digital puzzle station with an escape game on the United Nations.
Yeah, exactly. It was my first project with the chair, so I'm really delighted to talk about some of the results. So we start with the digital games, and this example is of the puzzle station on the United Nations. Just to clarify the definition real quick for understanding escape games, they are interactive learning experience, and participants play in groups. And they have to solve series of puzzles, and all the answers are hidden. So you really have to think out of the box. And most of the time, I would say all of the time, there is a limited time, a predetermined time. So there is a stress and there is a pressure to make it quick and make it right. We noticed that there is hardly any systematic empirical research on their implementation in civic education. So we just use the opportunity to evaluate them to see if they're suitable for civic education. And one such example is on the United Nations. Also, just some quick information about United Nations as a framing in the curriculum in Germany. And this topic is addressed in Germany, and both in English, history, and also in the civics class. So it is present, the kids will talk about it at some point. There is a challenge though, and the organizational activities are so far away from everyday life. So students have really difficulties to understand the presence of it or the importance, the challenges of this organization. So it's really hard to tackle why and understand why they have to be involved to talk about it. Still, there is also limited research in civic education, and as Monika said, the curriculum that is there is mainly focusing on model United Nations, and it is often addressing the students, university students, and it's also often more than one day. So it's really difficult to put this setting into school because no one has one day for one game in school. So I would like to show you the puzzle just for you to understand more with what we work. It's pretty big. There were 3 of them available, and the good thing is that the students didn't have to leave the school, so it could be brought into the school, so they would play in the familiar setting, and they would just look around. They can touch everything. You can there are so many buttons to touch music, very, very, very interactive. And the main thing would be still on the digital screen, so there's a digital puzzle. Yeah, so what did one have to do? Participants take on the role of the advisors to the new UN Secretary General, and there were 8 interactive puzzles tackling different levels of the UN activities, structure, some peacekeeping missions, sustainable development goals. So kids will, even those who have never heard somehow about the organization, will get the chance to learn, and those who did already maybe improve their knowledge. It was a very, very short game, maximum of 45 minutes, and it was advised that up to 7 people will play in one team. As Monika said, we used the usual for our chair methods, so it was both standardized questionnaires and individual interviews. And also someone from our team was always present, so we all took the notes, we looked and then reported what went wrong, what was really good. So we just stay in touch with the developers and tell them, yeah, bring the cable next time, because it was really difficult for, yeah, not to have this. We managed to get more than 400 students to participate in our questionnaire. And I would like to show some of the results. It was really, really great. Very happy to see that 86% really liked the puzzle, the game, the interaction, and very few of the people didn't like it. Yeah, so similar thing that were done for EU study, we also adapted to the UN, and we see that my coordination not that good. Attitudes toward EU, some of the things, some of the measurements did improve, even though the intervention was really, really short. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we see that interest in politics. It was too short to tackle the interest in politics, to improve the interest in politics. Maybe they weren't so convinced. But for example, general contentment was really nice. We also worked with the Likert scale. 1 is bad, 4 was really good, really agree. And yeah, that everyday relevance got a bit better, and related internal efficacy and subjective UN knowledge got really bad. So they were a bit more confident in saying, yeah, I know something about United Nations. Sorry. Then we did the multiple regression to show, to look what was the outcome, what was important for kids to enjoy the experience and to learn something. And here we see that actually nothing matters. No background information matters for students to enjoy the game. So all the genders, all the age, and all the cultural capital enjoy it equally. And we see that though the older students seem to think that they learned more and seem to get more interest. Same goes for cultural capital. And those who were more interested in politics before playing the game seem to have also got more motivated. And those who actually did better on the quiz test, they also seem to be motivated more after playing the game. Then we had some of the open questions in our questionnaire, and we then categorized them, and we just wanted to show what kind of things students report back to us. And on the question, what did you particularly like about the study? It was, yeah, diversity of tasks, teamwork, and interactive design. So it was like something new, something not that textbook text or something. Then we also asked what they didn't like, and it was technical problems, of course, very upsetting if the internet suddenly stopped working, and so the game has to be reset. And the thing was not intuitive, but that's the thing, saying we're not intuitive and not having enough time. We want that they have not intuitive tasks. We want them to think outside the box. So we should, yeah, probably consider this. And team too large, that's also with some classes, but more large classes, of course, it could be a bit upsetting that there was no space maybe for everyone to enjoy the game. On the question, do you have any suggestions for improving? Majority said no, everything was great. Can stay exactly like it is. And those who did have something, they said a better introduction, or actually they wished more content. They wanted to learn more. So it's a really promising result that the kids are students are very open for such things, and they're willing to learn in a very unusual settings, in a very interactive session. Just with the same developers, we also worked on the escape room, and also about United Nations, but it is only about climate protection. And its setting is that students go back in time, or participants go back in time, and they got a chance to incorporate climate protection in the UN Charter. So the world, the countries would pay more attention to climate and to avoid climate change, maybe. We don't have any results because we wanted to focus on more things. And that's exactly what I do now with switching to serious games on fake news. Any questions? Any willingness to pause? Perfect. Then I think it's very few slides left. So yeah, we just wanted to tell that now it's an ongoing project at our chair, a hacker attack. It's a setting where the regional office of the civic education in the south of Germany, so one region is coordinating it, and the students are asked to help innocent young person whose data was stolen. So there was the issues of identity theft, fake news, and yeah, I also think influence of the world of influence is tackled there. It's ongoing project, so I think the students are playing now in Germany this game. So we still don't have we haven't brought any results, but it's also the same style, the same research style that we showed before.
In perhaps one sentence, we
Yeah.
already see parallels to all of the
Yeah.
studies. That's the nice thing with many. So we have, she will present now the preliminary results for escape fake, but we see things that seem to be true for all the escape games in civic education, which leads to further research afterwards. But
No matter what topic, UN, EU, or something, what is not an organization or some fake news, everyone has interests, I don't know, most of the kids seem to have interest. So now it's escape fake. It's actually what we're doing also with you guys, with Frank, and some information about digital media literacy. Research suggests that the young people are struggling to evaluate and to detect the information that can be trusted, and also that the detection of fake news can also be very problematic. And it's a modern issue, so there is still little knowledge about how use assesses credibility of digital information. And of course, logically, there is a need for raising awareness about fake news and improving media literacy. And such serious games can be a very helpful tool to address this issue and to help young people with this issue and to find to get better media literacy. Yeah, so just a couple of words about our current project. This is a long title, but students' assessment of credibility in online environments, and it's actually cooperation with Dr. Reichert, with Frank, and we try to develop tools for measuring digital literacy to assess students' competencies to dealing with fake news. So we try to understand how we as researchers can measure something like this, something broad like this. And we would like to consider if there is such a game that can work for both cultural contexts, for Germany and for Congo. So we plan to use just one game and just to see if cultural backgrounds of those two regions can be still tackled by the same methods. It is pilot study. We actually managed to get 134 students to play the game, and then we got them to fill out the relatively small questionnaire after the game, and we just brought today some categorization of open questions, and we see that the movement, as you have to move around the room to tackle to solve the puzzles, that actually was really nice. Probably because kids are sitting the whole day and just get to move like on small pauses. So the movement during the class was seemed to be really nice. Also, the students were very happy to work in teams, and that this was something different from the regular lessons, from the regular just discussion or just reading a text and answering some written questions. And it was also reported that the puzzles, being so challenged as they were, it was really nice that they motivated the kids to think more, to find the answer that wasn't that obvious. The criticized aspect that is fortunately very easy to solve were not enough print materials, so next time we just print more, no problem. And that some participants found this challenging tasks to be a real problem. Improving suggestions, more tasks. Still, again, we have here completely different setting, completely different topic. Students seem to be willing to learn again, so it's a really promising outcome. And more space and time, again, as I said before, there has to be time pressure. And better moderation, maybe this goes back to this challenging set of tasks. Exactly. I forgot to tell the setting of the escape fake. Participants have to help the innocent bus driver whose data was leaked, and the students have to find a proof that the bus driver hasn't done anything wrong, hasn't committed any crime. So they go around his apartment digitally and look for hints that he was innocent. As it's shown here, you just use our iPad, and there are like 3D objects. So it is indeed something for Germany to use this 3D objects, and something you have to break away a base at some point. So it's really interactive. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Monika and Valeriia. So we are now basically at the end of the tour, and I invite you to ask questions or give comments if you have any. And this also applies to those who have joined us online. Okay.
Thank you so much, of course, for listening.
As long as you think about it, the things that you saw in the end for the escape game, it's really something we saw with all the escape games. That the kids, what they like about it is teamwork. It is the challenging games, it is that it's different from normal work, but that some of them didn't like what escape games are about, that you have time pressure, and that nobody tells you how to do it. I must say, perhaps I'm too old for escape games. I'm also still standing there, oh, what do I have to do? But that's where kids differ, and we want to look at the differences, which kids can you reach with it. But now it's all, we already have questions.
Okay, please.
Thank you both so much. I'm just wondering, would you mind sharing more about the results from observation, or the role of observation as a matter?
Yes.
And I know observation is always difficult, and the results are not easy to report. But I'm just wondering.
Yes. No, that's a very good question. I really must underline it was not systematic observation, because you can do systematic observation where you know things and so on. One of my PhD students who looks at hybrid simulation games, he did that. But for us, it was really just participating to make sense of the results. Because, for example, in the United Nations game, something went wrong in the first trial. And we see it in the results. They were not so content and so on. And afterwards you think, why? What is it? Is it because of the group? But now we know that the setting was just not good. It was too tight, something went wrong with the technique and so on. Or in another case, we have right now simulation games with primary school kids, also with control group, by the way. And there, in one game, it didn't go well, and they were not content. And because of our observation, we know that there were Russian kids, and the Russian kids, in the beginning, were upset that the Crim belongs to Ukraine and not to Russia. So they were distanced from the game. And this is something that you don't know when you're not part of it. Of course, you could ask questions to the moderators, but that kind of observations was it. Yeah, or that we pick out certain kids for the interviews, that we try to pick out kids that were very involved, but also kids that were not involved at all. And that's something we derive from the observation, but no more standardization.
Thank you so much.
We had a question here.
Hi, thank you. This is a very interesting research. So my first question is kind of a clarifying question, because your title is serious games. So I'm wondering, because I am totally an outsider in terms of civic education. I'm wondering, what do you mean by serious games? Are they fun games? Are they what kind of games are considered as serious games? Which ones are not serious?
Yeah.
And then the second one is about the implementation of the experiment. So I want you to know more about, because I assume that there are a lot of diversity in terms of the schools in Germany. So when you are picking out the schools for your experiments, so what kind of considerations do you have, and how representative are there? And the third one is about the effect. So you have the pre and post effect, meaning that you are doing the survey right after the game. So my question is whether this effect sustain, like how long does it sustain? Or does it disappear, right?
Again, I think I can start, but you should take over. Very good questions, and I try to remember them all. And I start with the last question. We do have in some of the games, for example, also in the UN game, and also in the primary school, which was more systematic in the evaluation, third point of measurement. And usually that is 6 to 8 weeks later. So it's not long-term effects, because I really think it's difficult to measure long-term effects on any short intervention in education, because there's so many things different. But at least 6 to 8 weeks later. And it was amazing that we saw, of course, as was to be expected, that some of the gains in interest and knowledge went down, but as compared to the control group, still much higher, and still an effect size above 2 as compared to before the game. So we do see 6 to 8 weeks later relevant effects on the dispositions that we measured. When I was in 2 cases, I was in the class and conducted the data collection, and the kids remembered, for example, for the simulation game, what they had voted for. They still knew. Or when another observation, when we see future teachers who study to become civics teachers, I always, since I've been an assistant professor, so since more than 10 years, I ask them, what did you like about your civics classes and what did you not like? And what are your goals? And I do that with a systematic card collection. And there's always some of them who remember that they did games, that they did interactive experiences. And I remember that 10 years later. Even myself, I remember what I did with the game and extracurricular. But that's just not from the studies. From the studies we see at the third point of measurement that it goes a bit down, but it's still relevant after 6 to 8 weeks. As to the question, what serious games, perhaps you have it in the backup also for the UN. What is relevant for what are serious games for us? There's, as many of you know, different definitions of serious games. But we see serious games as normally digital games. The first simulation game is not a real serious game. Digital games that are also developed to convey learning effects in a playful manner. That would be serious games. So it's not just gaming, you always learn something from everywhere, but the idea, you pack it up into some, and that is, I think, something that some of you are really working on. How can you do that? You pack it up in a nice, enjoyable way, but you still have the intention to convey either knowledge or motivations or other things. But I'm sure there's experts in the room, I know, and you can also criticize perhaps this way of taking out certain serious games. But the simulation games, so the digital simulation games would be serious games again. So it's not just computer games. And what we looked at in this case, it's all games with teamwork, either online or offline, but it's teamwork. But we did look also at serious games that you play alone, the Chancellor Simulator, where you're being the German Chancellor and you have to, after the elections, get your ministers around and do coalitions. And there you play it. And the second question was? Good, you start? Yes?
For sure, we try to do the very schools. With so many years with experience, we do have our databases of schools. And in Germany, it's a big question of trying to get some samples from Eastern Germany and Western Germany. And that's what we are the most paying attention to. And for example, the UN study was just done in our region, so it's Western Germany, middle of Germany. But we tried there to combine the bigger cities, so the Hanover, for example, the center of our region, and the village schools. So we try to pay attention while inviting schools. Sometimes in some projects only grammar school answers, so because they're so overwhelmed because of the COVID-19 with the curriculum, but that's for sure on our minds when we consider for whom is the offer.
I would add, it is not, or we should have said it in the beginning, it is not representative studies, and it is not so far what we showed, not random control field studies. But of course, we want to do that. We want the development of measurement instruments. We want to go into more standardized research, which is very rare in civic education. I think Frank can also say that. Now I remember Professor Hoskins from the UK. She's very strong in that. She did a meta-analysis of studies, and she hardly found randomized control group intervention studies in civic education on certain effects, but we would like to do that. But sometimes it's just grammar schools, not just by accident because we focus it, but we try to find, for example, primary schools. We have primary schools of the area where the professors live. And in Germany, you usually send your kids not like here to any place, but usually to the closest place. But some people try to send better schools somewhere else. But anyway, so we have very, very posh schools and we have problem schools, and we try to get both in our sample, because in the end these games should work with all of them. So we look at that, but then we also control for, of course, like type is complex, for the layered structure of the data, that we have classes and individuals in the classes, and we see rather an effect of the individual level than the class level so far.
We have a few questions from the chat.
That's great.
Okay.
Chat.
Yeah, don't do it.
Okay. So I'll read those questions
Yes,
to you. Many thanks. Very interesting presentation. I was wondering about the availability of games that can be made available to students to understand complex problems, including those related to policy. Simulations are quite interesting, but if dealing with complex challenges, how can the students and the teachers understand to what extent certain decisions impacted more than others, particularly when several decisions have been taken already?
Okay. The availability of serious games, complex issues in politics is low in Germany so far. Many who have studied that, there's 2 PhD theses finished, and that's what they said. The availability of like serious games, computer games, and we said online games is low. There's more and more online simulation games now, but that's why we presented you the simulation games. Simulation games really tackle the complexity of politics. So, and there's many available. And we try to develop them also in our own projects with developers. So good simulation games. But your question, the second question in that question is of course extremely important. So how do you deal with reality? Either that the decisions have been already taken, or that you have a reduction of complexity that you always need in games and in education, that also draws a picture that is not quite correct of reality, because reality is always more complex than the model. So what is very important is the debriefing. So in these analog simulation games, you always have in the end a phase where you take off the role, you take off your role card, and first of all you ask, how did you feel, what did you experience, but then you make the reality check. What in the game is like this in reality, and what is different because it's just more complex. If the decision has already been taken, it's not really a big problem because mostly the kids don't know about it yet. And then in the end, you can say, by the way, 2 months ago, the parliament decided this in reality. Or the decision will be in 2 months, and then you look again. but in the end, you see politics, and that's the same for Hong Kong, is an ongoing process. If you think of COVID, yeah, you never have one decision that will last forever, but you have to re-evaluate decisions if the world changes. You tear down houses, you build new houses. So it always makes sense to discuss decision-making in politics because you can also change it in all societies and systems. Yeah, but that's the thing, and that's perhaps actually a challenge for the serious games. And we want to do more research about it, but I think that's really important. If they are played by themselves and there's no teachers or instructors, then there might be no debriefing, and then you learn perhaps the wrong concepts and so on. And that's why I know colleagues of yours are now trying to put some kind of debriefing into the game itself. Perhaps you can explain about this.
Yeah, I would use, because the complexity of the real life is really a tricky question. Yeah, I remember about 10 years ago in Hong Kong, there was a board game about Hong Kong as a state council. So there were different parties, just like a simulation game, it is a type of game. But the question is, if we didn't intervene or just let the students to discuss, and they will discover many uncertainties or questions, and they keep on discussing. So it's always challenging for me as a instructor at that time. Yeah, try to give a debate just as what you said. So I think for any such kind of simulation game, in Hong Kong we just call them maybe digital game. Nowadays, before we just call them as educational game, but we didn't use the term serious game because the term may just affect anyone. Oh, is it really serious? Right? Yeah.
Okay, but,
anyway.
but of course, that's also interesting. We would never tell the children we are going, or the youngsters, we are going to play a serious game with you. I mean, that's contradictory. No, one talks about the serious games, but it's just a game. And for what you say, this challenge, we also have methods, didactic methods, like you can ask, if you were playing the game now, we would ask the question, first of all, how you feel, and you can move in the classroom. There's the yes side. If I tell you a statement, there's the no side, and you move around. And so even if you're shy and you don't speak, we would see where you put your body, and then you can ask some people, why do you say this now? And the others can move after the argument. But you can also do it by asking them, what do you think? This statement, is it true that there's only 20 people in the European Parliament or only 5 countries in the United Nations? And then you can then introduce what is correct, or you can use quizzes.
We have 2 more questions so I'll just read it to you. Thanks a lot for your sharing. I have 2 questions. In the first study, a control group was included. I would like to inquire about how the control group was arranged. Was there no intervention at all in the control group, or was a traditional teaching method used? Additionally, I have another question. When analyzing the pre and post analysis results, are there any variables that you need to control for?
Okay, thank you very much. I must admit, and I think I said it, but I want to stress again, this study that I showed you did not have a control group. It was our very first study that we did, and we didn't even think it in this way with simulation games, and we didn't think it would work. We thought the kids with the second questionnaire would say, tear down this questionnaire. Again, the same thing, but it did work. We had reliable measurement. So afterwards we did other studies. And so I can tell you for the primary school, 4th grade, we also have about 350 students of the age of 10. And we have a control group of 125 students, both not representative, but we controlled for the background variables. Interestingly, in both groups, they didn't vary on the background variables. Gender, cultural capital, socioeconomic status. That's just by accident. They did not vary. And in the control group, we see that the concepts are the same. So we see they stay the same and they don't improve. Did they have an intervention? No. They had no intervention at all. And they gained a little bit of knowledge because they talked about the questionnaire probably afterwards with their teachers, with their parents, but they didn't gain the things of the simulation. Your question is very important because what does that mean? I cannot tell you that the simulation game works better for my study than other interventions in this study, because of course I did not have another kind of intervention, perhaps an excursion or something. But there are studies, that's what we presented in the beginning, like Monika with the games on the World Food Program or something of the United Nations. He had a control group, and I think also a more rigid, smaller group, but more rigid selection. And they only had text-based. The same things, text-based. What he saw, the learning effects are more sustainable with the game-based, but he also saw a problematic persuasion effect. He saw that those playing the game more easily said, oh yes, that's a cool organization, the UN. And of course we talked about that before, in Germany we want critical thinking in a way, so they should not just say it's a cool organization, because we all know, I think the UN, there's some things that work and some things that don't work. So that was the answer to that.
Okay.
Yes. And the variables to control, well, this is what we indeed also did, like we did latent change models, and we looked how socio-demographic background variables influenced latent change. And indeed, here we see, as we saw in the structural equation model, that girls profited more from these simulation games. It seems that for them, it's an opportunity that they usually don't have in German classes, because their politics-related self-concept is lower. Not as much as in STEM. In STEM in Germany, it's very much that girls think they can't do natural sciences, mathematics, in comparison, right? Okay, that's as an answer.
Okay, this latter part about gender actually addresses the question that I would have asked, because I was really interested in knowing whether these gender differences that you showed us in terms of the pre-study interest, whether this sort of declines or even disappears the game. But you already addressed it just now.
But yeah, it declines, exactly. We are in the backup problem somewhere, there's a structural equation with the latent change variable, and you see it's not going away. You also see it in box plots that it's not going away, but it's declining, definitely, on knowledge. Yes.
I think we would have time for one more or two more questions. Yes, please.
I'm curious about, do German schools provide formal education regarding civic education for students across all grades? And will students who have taken these kind of courses perform better in playing such kind of game? Then the playing such kind of game will be a kind of interactive test of what they have learned before. Yeah, I'm just curious about whether their formal learning process will influence their performance in playing the game.
Yeah. There is subjects, civics, with different names across Germany and different shapes, sometimes with geography, sometimes with economics, in all secondary schools. There also is in primary school a subject, Sachunterricht, where social science education is part of it. But the implementation in primary school will vary because the teachers are not properly educated. So they will refrain from politics because they feel, I don't know how to do civic education, and because they think children are too small for it, but we can show they are not. As to the secondary school, some of our outcome variables are relevant for the curriculum. For example, knowledge about the EU is curricula valid. We also, the knowledge test is part that is asked for in the curriculum. So yes, they learn something that would give them a better mark in this. But what is lacking, and that was the other question, I cannot tell you with our studies that the simulation game will do it better than a very great different didactical approach. Therefore, we would need to have more interventions with different types of interventions, but in a richer design. And that's the future. That is our challenge for the future. Thank you, Julie.
Yes, please.
Thanks for this presentation. Really interesting. So I was wondering, I'm not sure if this is an empirical question or a theoretical question, but I'm thinking about how the goal, one of the goals is efficacy. And I noticed, especially in the first game, but I think throughout, there's this question of how challenging it is. So what I'm wondering is, does the sense of efficacy go down if it's too challenging? On the other hand, if it's not challenging enough, would it sort of not achieve efficacy because it's just a fun game? So how do you, is there a goal in terms of how challenging it will be in relation to the competencies and the skills and dispositions that you would want to develop?
Exactly. I think if it would be if it were too challenging, then you would not gain self-efficacy. I would also think so. So how they, in the simulation game, how they gain the self-efficacy is because they have a role and they discuss politics and they take political decisions. And this is something that the kids often only see on television, only see Angela Merkel and other famous people and think, oh, no, but that's not for me. And in the game, suddenly it's easy, they have a role, they discuss, and afterwards they realize, well, I can discuss, I can speak up, I can also negotiate, and they think they rate their own knowledge and their discourse capacity higher. But I do believe if they were not too challenging, but if they were too challenging, this wouldn't work. For the primary school, there's a huge effect. So we saw it's not too challenging. But for the other games, I would think so. In the backup, but I can't deal so good now with the slides because I only see what you see and not my own overview of the slides, because we also have an explanation, because you're also interested in theoretical terms, about the aim to raise self-efficacy. How much self-efficacy do we want to raise also in mathematics and chemistry and also in civic education? It is not a maximum, because it's not good if you think, yay, I can do it. I mean, and then you realize in reality, no, you can't do it. I can jump above a certain fence and then you jump against the fence. That wouldn't help. You want some kind of a realistic look at your self-efficacy. But we see in a lot of research also of political science all over the world that self-efficacy, the feeling of efficacy, is a prerequisite for participation. And also for mathematics, right? And also for teachers. If I think, oh, I can't do it, I won't try it out. And so we try to overcome the obstacle of too low self-efficacy in order to make them able to participate. And in another latent class analysis, we also saw that although the median value goes up, it is not that it goes up for all, but we see that the feeling of responsiveness, for example, because VU is not so super responsive actually, goes up for those who have very low feeling in the beginning to a median value, but those with a high starting point, they even go down because they see, realistically, perhaps I overrated it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. We are basically at the end of this session. I would really like to thank Monika and Valeriia for this great tour. Just could scan the QR code and just provide some feedback about the session before you go. And meanwhile, I'd like to ask for a round of applause for our speaker. Thank you. And feel free to approach them before you leave, if you'd like to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting us. And we had so many talks the last days. We have learned so much here. And I know we will learn more with the talk with you and with the other dinners and lunches. And thank you for inviting us. Thanks.
My pleasure.